The countdown on my wrist display hit 0, and I was already moving before the sound finished. 3 armed buyers stood across the table from me in a smuggler's den on the edge of Threnna Station, and every one of them had a weapon aimed at my chest. This was not how the meeting was supposed to go. My name is Carrick. I am a contractor. For 41 years I have taken jobs that other mercenaries were too afraid to touch, and I have never once walked into a room without walking back out of it. But that night, the 3 buyers in front of me were not there to pay me. They were there to make sure I never spoke again about what I knew. I want to tell you how it started, because the ending only makes sense if you understand the beginning. 6 days earlier, I was sitting alone in a bar near the station's lower docks, when a young broker named Overin dropped into the seat across from me. He had a data slate in his hand, and a nervous kind of excitement on his face, the look of someone who had never carried a heavy contract before, and did not yet understand what it would cost him. He slid the slate toward me without a word. I looked at it. A human colony ship called the Horizon Light, carrying over 500 civilians, 3 weeks out from the nearest human outpost. No military escort. No weapons platform. The job was simple on paper. Intercept the ship. Destroy it. Make sure the destruction was recorded and broadcast across every channel in Coalition space. I did not touch the slate at first. I asked him who wanted this done. He hesitated, then told me. A group of old trade families, the kind who had controlled shipping lanes and resource contracts for 3 centuries before humans ever left their home system. Humans had arrived only 8 years earlier, and in that short time, they had undercut every price these families set, won over every trading partner these families depended on, and refused to show the fear that older species had always shown when a stronger power leaned on them. The trade families were not just losing money, they were losing control, and they hated humans for taking it from them without ever raising a weapon. I told Overin I would think about it. He looked relieved, because he expected me to say yes eventually. Everyone always expected me to say yes eventually. That night, I pulled up everything I could find on human ships, because I never take a job without knowing exactly what I am walking into. What I found did not match the picture the trade families had painted. Human engineers did not build for comfort or elegance, the way most Coalition shipyards did. They built for survival against odds that should never have let their species reach the stars in the first place. Every human colony ship carried backup systems layered on top of backup systems, life support that could fail 3 separate times and still keep people breathing. Hull plating rated for stress no civilian vessel should ever need, as if some old instinct told them that safety was never something you could fully trust. Every crew member, including children old enough to hold a tool, was trained in basic repair and emergency response, not because a law required it, but because it was simply how humans raised their young. Prepare for the worst, because the worst had visited their species more times than anyone could count. This was not a soft target. This was a hardened ship, wearing the paint of a civilian vessel, and every person aboard had grown up learning how to survive. But that alone was not what stopped me from accepting the contract. What stopped me was something I found buried in an old shipping record, a routine entry nobody had bothered to hide because nobody thought it mattered. 11 months before, a sister ship to the Horizon Light had suffered severe damage after striking an unmapped debris field. It was not an attack, it was an accident, the kind that happens in deep space more often than anyone likes to admit. The response from human territory was not a committee meeting or an insurance claim. It was 17 ships, breaking every safety limit their engines were built to handle, crossing 4 days of travel in a single day, because 500 of their people were dying in the dark, and not one captain in that fleet hesitated to answer the call. They reached the ship in time. Every single person aboard survived. I sat with that record for a long while. In 41 years of contract work, I had seen empires abandon entire garrisons to save fuel costs. I had seen fleets calculate the acceptable number of losses among their own citizens before filing the number without a second thought. That was the galaxy I understood, the galaxy I had built my career inside of. Humans were not playing that game. A species willing to burn out its own engines, rather than let 500 of its people die alone, was not a species you could threaten with a single demonstration kill. It was a species you left alone, carefully, and for good reason. I went back to Ovrin and told him I would not take the job. He looked confused at first, then worried, because he understood that once word got out that I had refused, other contractors would ask why, and the answer would not be good for the people paying him. I explained it to him plainly. I told him the message his clients wanted to send would not land the way they thought it would. If someone attacked 500 human civilians to make a political point, the humans left behind would not respond with fear. They would respond with purpose. And a species that had already proven it would burn everything it had to save 500 strangers on a damaged ship, would not stop at diplomacy once they decided someone had tried to take their people from them on purpose. Ovrin did not take the job back to his clients himself. He told me later that 3 other contractors turned it down after hearing what I had found. A 4th contractor, a reckless one named Ferric who had never once done proper research before a job, decided to take the contract anyway. He assumed the ship's defenses were as weak as its paperwork suggested. He was wrong. His strike team never got close enough to fire a shot. The ship's automated defense grid, something the trade families had dismissed as a basic civilian safety measure, disabled his entire team before they crossed the outer perimeter. Ferric survived, but barely, and he never took another contract again. Word of what happened spread fast through the parts of the galaxy where contracts like this get traded, and that should have been the end of it. But the trade families were not finished, and neither, it turned out, was I. 3 days after Ferric's failure, I received a message asking me to meet with the clients directly. I should have refused. I have refused meetings like that before, because when someone wants to meet the person who turned down their contract, it is rarely to thank them. But I was curious, and curiosity has always been my weakness. The meeting was set in a private room on the lower level of Threna Station, far from the crowded corridors where security patrols actually mattered. I walked in expecting a conversation. Instead, I found 3 armed buyers waiting for me, each one holding a weapon aimed directly at my chest, and a 4th figure standing behind them, who I recognized immediately as one of the senior trade family representatives, a thin, sharp-eyed man named Corvin. Corvin did not waste time with pleasantries. He told me that my refusal had cost his families more than money. It had cost them credibility. Other contractors were now hesitant to take any job involving human targets, and rumors were spreading that even the galaxy's most feared mercenary was afraid of a species barely a decade into spaceflight. He said he could not allow that story to spread any further, and the easiest way to stop it was to make sure I never told it again. I asked him if he understood what he was about to do. He laughed and told me I had grown sentimental in my old age, trading my reputation for a species that would never even know my name. That was when the countdown on my wrist display hit 0, and everything moved at once. I had not walked into that meeting unprepared. 41 years of contract work teaches you never to trust an invitation that arrives too quickly after a refusal. So I had spent the 3 days before the meeting doing what I always do before stepping into unfamiliar territory. I studied the room, I studied the exits, and I made contact with someone I never expected to need. 2 days earlier, while gathering information about Corvin's operation, I had come across a human security consultant working out of a small office near the station's trade district. Her name was Emma, and she had spent the last 4 years advising smaller shipping companies on how to protect themselves from exactly the kind of pressure the old trade families like to apply. She had no reason to help me. I was, after all, the same kind of contractor her clients feared. But when I told her what I had found buried in that shipping record, and what I suspected the trade families intended to do next, she agreed to help without hesitation. She did not send me weapons or soldiers. She sent me something better. A small signal relay, no larger than my palm, built to broadcast a distress beacon on a frequency that human monitoring stations checked constantly, a habit left over from decades of learning that help delayed was often help denied. I had placed it in my jacket before walking into that room, set to trigger the moment my life signs spiked into combat stress. The 3 buyers fired the instant the countdown hit 0. I had already thrown myself sideways behind the heavy table between us, using it as cover, while the shots tore through the space where I had been standing a moment before. My training took over the way it always did. I rolled, came up behind the nearest buyer, and disarmed him before he could adjust his aim, sending his weapon skidding across the floor. The second buyer turned toward me, and I used the disarmed man as a shield, just long enough to close the distance between us. A single strike to the side of his weapon arm sent his shot wide, and I pulled the weapon from his grip before he could recover his balance. 2 down, unarmed and out of the fight, though the room was far from secure. The third buyer, more cautious than the other two, retreated toward the door and called out for reinforcements. Corvin, watching from the corner of the room, shouted at his remaining man not to let me leave alive. I understood then that this was never meant to be a negotiation. It was meant to be an execution, and the only reason I was still standing was that I had spent 4 decades learning to survive rooms exactly like this one. I moved toward the third buyer, using the scattered furniture as cover, while he fired wildly in my direction. My focus was not on ending the fight quickly. It was on staying alive long enough for the signal I had triggered to reach someone who could actually help, because even though I had trained my entire life for exactly this kind of confrontation, 4 armed opponents in a closed room were not odds I could guarantee surviving alone. The door burst open before the third buyer could steady his aim. 2 figures moved through the doorway with a speed and precision that told me immediately they were not station security. The first was a man named Ryan, broad-shouldered and calm, in a way that only came from real experience, moving through the doorway low and fast. Behind him came a woman named Grace, who I would later learn had spent 6 years serving with a human rapid response unit before retiring into private security work. Between the 2 of them, the third buyer was disarmed and restrained within seconds, and Corvin found himself staring down the barrel of a weapon he clearly had not expected to see pointed at him that night. I asked Ryan how they had arrived so fast. He told me the distress signal Emma had given me was not just a beacon. It was a priority alert tied directly into a small human response network, operating quietly out of Threnna Station, a network most of the galaxy did not even know existed, because humans had learned long ago not to announce every precaution they took. When the signal triggered, Ryan and Grace had been less than 90 seconds away, already moving before the message finished transmitting, because that was simply how their team operated. No hesitation, no committee, just movement toward anyone who needed help. Corvin tried to argue his way out of the situation, insisting the whole confrontation was a misunderstanding between business partners. Grace was not interested in his explanation. She informed him calmly that everything said in that room over the last several minutes had been recorded from the moment Emma's device activated, including his own words about silencing me permanently. Station security, alerted by the same network, arrived shortly after to take Corvin and his men into custody, and for the first time since walking into that room, I allowed myself to relax. Ryan asked me why a mercenary with my reputation had reached out to a stranger for help instead of handling the meeting entirely on my own. I told him the truth. I had learned, over 4 decades, that surviving a fight is not the same as surviving a trap, and the difference between the two often comes down to whether anyone is willing to come looking for you when things go wrong. In my line of work, almost nobody ever was. He smiled at that, and told me it was different for his people. Humans had spent most of their history without the luxury of assuming help was coming, and somewhere along the way that had turned into something else entirely, a habit of showing up for each other, no matter the distance or the danger, because the alternative had cost them too much for too long to ever be acceptable again. Grace added that the same instinct that sent 17 ships racing to save 500 strangers on a damaged colony vessel was the same instinct that sent 2 of them running through a station corridor toward a stranger's distress signal without asking who that stranger was or what they had done to earn the galaxy's fear. It was not about deserving help. It was about being the kind of people who gave it anyway. I thought about Ovrin then, and the contract he had first slid across the table to me 6 days earlier. I thought about the trade families who believed a single demonstration kill could teach a young species to be afraid, without ever understanding that fear was not the lesson humans had learned from their own history. Endurance was, loyalty was. Showing up, again and again, no matter the cost, was. I left that meeting room a different contractor than the one who had walked in, not because I had changed my methods, and not because I suddenly believed violence could be avoided in every situation, but because I finally understood something the old trade families never would. Humans were not soft simply because their ships looked civilian and their history was short. They were something far more dangerous than any weapon those families had ever traded in. They were a species built entirely around the refusal to abandon their own, and that refusal had just saved my life, in a room where 4 armed men had already decided I would not walk out alive. Word spread quickly after that night, faster than any contract or bounty I had ever completed. Other mercenaries heard what happened to Ferric when he underestimated a human ship's defenses, and they heard what happened to Corvin when he underestimated the reach of a network most of the galaxy did not even know existed. Slowly, contracts targeting human ships and human colonies became harder to find buyers for, because the risk no longer seemed worth the reward, not when the species you were hunting might already be watching, might already have a response network moving before your team had even finished planning the attack. I still take contracts today. My reputation as the galaxy's most feared mercenary has not disappeared, and I do not expect it to. But I have never taken another job involving a human target, and I never will, because I learned firsthand what the trade families refuse to understand. You cannot threaten a species that has already decided nothing will stop them from coming back for their own. Not distance, not danger, not even the fear that has controlled every other power in this galaxy for centuries. If you ever find yourself sitting across the table from someone offering you a contract against a human target, remember what happened in that room on Threna Station. Remember that the ship you think is unarmed might already know you are coming. Remember that the people you think have no one watching over them might already have a network in motion before you even finish loading your weapon. I only needed one warning to understand that. I am giving you the same warning now, and I do not intend to give it twice.